Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Caitlin. So I'm Nick Codd from Seattle Jobs Initiative, and we're going to be providing the training for you today, the webinar. And I'm going to be joined by my colleagues, Bob Thibodeau and Susan O'Callaghan. You've heard from Susan before. You'll hear from her a bit today. Today, she's going to be talking more from her role as a former SNAP ENT provider. She's done that with a couple of organizations, and so she'll just pitch in a few spots to share her past experience. In addition to the three of us from SGI, we're very pleased to report that we're going to be joined by colleagues from Project Return in Tennessee. Project Return is a social enterprise there that has been operating as a SNAP ENT provider since 2019. So they can share a little bit about how they've integrated SNAP ENT into their organization, talk a little bit about SNAP ENT from the perspective of building their capacity and having the right capacity to operate the program. So always good to hear from an organization that's actually doing this work. So today we're going to follow, in some ways, our typical sort of agenda and approach. We're going to be looking at services, and this time more from the perspective of the capacity needed around your services, a bit about the why and the what of reporting on services. We'll talk about people, the people served, and from the perspective of the capacity needed to verify ENT participation, ongoing participation, those things related to capacity and services to people. We'll talk a bit more about funding, which we talked about last time, some of the issues around compliance and invoicing for your ENT program. We'll also talk about building processes and how to think about building this capacity into your organization. And again, this is something that you'll hear from SGI on, as well as Project Return. So as usual, we want to just touch base a little bit on what we talked about the last time we were all together in our past webinar. So we talked about the funding related to SNAP ENT. We looked at, we started by looking at the revenues, focusing on non-federal and non-federally matched revenues that you have available to support SNAP ENT that align with SNAP ENT. We talked about expenses and services that are tied to your SNAP ENT activities, your staffing, your program costs, the different components that you're offering. And we talked about participants, and again, the SNAP ENT eligibility and how all this sort of works into the funding perspective for SNAP ENT. So that was last time. And again, some of this touched on capacity, and we'll talk a bit more about it today. In addition, as you know, we have used this Venn diagram as sort of an anchor for our trainings. We've talked about services, clients, funding. We've talked about some of the aspects of administering all of this, how this sort of comes together to create this opportunity around the 50% reimbursement, building your capacity. And today we're going to zero in on the capacity aspect of this Venn diagram, what it is and how it connects with the other aspects of funding, services, and clients. So this is sort of, our approach for today. So I want to just start with this question about capacity. What is it? And acknowledge that this is a question that we hear a lot, not just through this webinar series and our work with all of you, but we hear this in a lot of our technical assistance work across the country. Organizations want to know, as a SNAP ENT provider, what capacity will I need to have? What new things will I need to be thinking about? Am I going to need to hire new staff? Am I going to have to do something to our database? Do our fiscal staff have to go through some new type of training? New software? I mean, what's involved? What's it going to take? Because in some ways, this question around capacity is maybe a little less quantifiable, easily quantifiable, as compared to some of the other things that we've talked about, like your clients. They're on SNAP or they're not on SNAP. Your funding, it's either federal or non-federal. So those things are complicated, but a little more clear-cut. Capacity really touches all aspects of your organization. And it's in some ways a little harder thing to sort of get your hands around initially. People have questions and concerns. So some really basic questions to start with around capacity. Some, basic stuff. So is your organization financially stable? Okay, that should, that's a big question. Hopefully the answer there is yes, but we know that there are certainly nonprofits that struggle at times. They struggle a bit, and their revenues can be a little bit bumpy or a little bit inconsistent. So, are you financially stable? It's a good starting question. Do you have a good record on managing federal and state contracts if you have those? Now, you don't necessarily have to have had federal and state contracts, but if you have, how do you do with those? Do you manage them well? Do you have the infrastructure within your organization to handle those, to manage those, to comply with those in the way you need to? And whether you have federal or state contracts or not, how do you do in managing all of your contracts, all of the requirements attached? And as a social enterprise, my guess is you have other types of contracts that could be, less related to social services, but maybe some of the services you provide. So how do you do with your contracts? So these are very fundamental questions, but they're all very relevant, very appropriate questions to ask and things to look at in sort of assessing your capacity and your readiness related to SNAP ENT. So what are some of the things that you need to know? And this is just a beginning list and discussion, but these are other questions, sort of that bigger question of like, what's this all about? So what do you need to know? Yes, you need to understand the basic expectations as an ENT partner, and that's really what this webinar series is designed to help you with. So you need to have that understanding. And as an ENT provider, if that's the direction you're headed in, you want to make sure that all of the appropriate staff in your organization have good ENT knowledge. At a minimum, they need to understand their role in SNAP ENT, how it impacts their department, their function, sort of how they fit in the bigger, the bigger pie or the bigger sort of wheel around SNAP ENT, SNAP employment and training. So how does it all come together? We also encourage you to think about SNAP ENT for your organization as capacity building in nature. So this is an opportunity to build your capacity. So this question is, do we have the right capacity? There's questions on that, answers to that, but then this opportunity is really about building your capacity. The reimbursement funds, you get the 50% reimbursements funds are yours to keep, yours to spend, for the most part, how you'd like to. I think the general idea is that they'd be reinvested in SNAP ENT. But think of this as a capacity building opportunity. And so if you are thinking about capacity building in your current capacity, this will be an opportunity to expand it, to strengthen it as you go on and move forward as an ENT provider. So things that you don't really want to think about needing to do up front is, by and large, this is not, as a new ENT provider, you don't want to think that you have to go out and hire a bunch of new staff to solely focus on SNAP ENT and assume that your reimbursements are going to cover those costs. So this is not something you should be thinking about doing. At the same time, there are certainly new tasks, new things that existing staff, existing programs are going to need to do, but that doesn't necessarily equate to having to add FTEs across the board or even one here or there. You want to avoid thinking you need to create new programs that specifically are tied to SNAP ENT and SNAP ENT participants. You don't need to go out and create new programs to fill all the different components that might be available in your state. This is really a unique program. It's new funding to keep doing what you've been doing with the people that you have been serving. So it's new funding for the same programs and for the same services. And then you use that funding to sort of expand, to strengthen, and to build. Another thing that we also caution people around is that as a new provider, even though you've got a contract with your state SNAP agency or county SNAP agency, Don't expect large numbers of referrals to come from your state SNAP agency or the county. You're not going to see large numbers or even modest numbers of new participants referred to you. Again, it's really sticking with and starting with those people you're serving currently, people that are coming into your organization through your usual referral channels that you're going to be building your program around. So thinking about capacity, you don't need to run out and think you need to have the capacity to serve, hundreds of new participants or many new participants. That's not something that you should be concerned about or expect especially initially. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about reporting on services. So, as you know, SNAP E&T is a federal program. It's funded by USDA FNS. And FNS requires E&T participation information from states. So the states, which are ultimately responsible for E&T in your area, in your state, they have to report to FNS on a regular basis how many people are participating and some information about what people are doing in the program and some of the outcomes. So they need to do that in order to get the funding that's needed. So they need to do that for the 100% funds that we've talked about, as well as the 50% reimbursement. So this is a requirement that's built in. That requirement to track and report information to FNS gets passed on to third-party partners, because the state's going to look to you or rely on you to tell them who you're serving and what people are doing. So, and all states are going to have a mechanism for doing this. Some are easier to use than others, but this is basically how it works. And in many ways, not different than many other funding sources that you might be using or familiar with. So another thing that we've looked at is that as a program, your employment social enterprise, you align with multiple components. And your ESE, so you align with many components, but your employment social enterprise is going to need to have the capacity to report on the SNAP E&T participation in these activities. So essentially what that means is, you may be able to offer 3 or 4 components. As a E&T provider, the people participating in these components, you're going to have to track and report that to the state, which ultimately will go to FNS. So what does this mean? You'll have to develop, and you may have something in place already that you may need to tweak or adjust a bit, but you'll have to develop the capacity to internally track the component participation in your program. So that means if you're offering work experience and supervised job search and job retention, you're going to have to be able to say, these are the people that are involved in these services. This is the start date and this is the end date. So that's the type of stuff. So a bit different probably than what you're tracking for other projects. You're going to have to track E&T activity for your invoicing. So the expenses related to staff time and program costs as you do your invoice, whether it's a monthly or a quarterly one. These are things that will have to be tracked. Again, it could be a little bit different than other projects that you're tracking and reporting on. Tracking required data and reporting to your state or county agency enrollments. So this is just sort of, and we'll talk about this a bit more in the next slide, is that there's just some general data and reporting that you have to track and report. Again, we've talked about a little bit of this already: enrollments, the status and progress, successful completions, those types of things. So here's a little more information about the types of data that you'll be expected to track. And I think, again, you'll see some of this is stuff you're probably already doing. Some of it will be new. Participant data, demographics, not too uncommon. Things like, how far has somebody gotten in school, speaking English as a second language, male or female gender, age, things like that. Some more specific things might be related to SNAP E&T. Are they voluntary versus mandatory participants? And this is something that your state will inform you on and let you know kind of what the difference of that might be, as well as potentially needed to track your ABODs, your able-bodied adults without dependents. So again, these are things that you may need to track. And as we said before, the activities, the outcome data, the number of clients exiting a specific component, the number of incomplete exits, so people who start but don't finish, the number that may lose contact altogether, things like that. And then some states will have other types of data and things that they'll ask for. States and counties, as ENT providers, do have the prerogative to maybe add in a few different tracking measures related to SNAP ENT or related to other types of data that they're tracking and reporting locally. So you may have some other types of things that you'll have to report. So again, this is kind of a sampling. I mean, it's basically it's pretty accurate information, but this will give you a bit of a sense of what needs to be tracked. So at this point, I want to ask my colleague, Susan O'Callaghan, just to share her experience with all this, again, coming from the perspective of somebody who's worked with 2 SNAP ENT organizations, one being a social enterprise. So Susan, what do you think?
Hi. Yeah. So, in my experience, I worked in 2 different programs where we used a customized database. One was a house-built database that was specifically designed for our program. The other one was we used the Microsoft CRM database, and in both cases, we were interested in tracking a whole lot of stuff about the people we were serving, just for our own reporting and analysis needs. So, and I imagine that might be similar for a lot of you, that you want to understand and be able to kind of measure who you're working with. So in that case, it really was just adding a few specific fields around, like as Nick mentioned, it was really important for us to understand how many people were in each SNAP ENT component, especially if folks are kind of on their own timeline and they're in different components at different times. You really wanted to understand that because that was information that we had to share back to the SNAP agency kind of as in real time. So that was important, as well as, any information that we got back from the SNAP agency. So, stuff around their SNAP status, whether they were receiving SNAP or not, if they were denied SNAP, those were always really good pieces of information for us to have as well. And then, when we're talking about things around like mandatory and voluntary participation or ABOD status, those are things that obviously the SNAP agency tracks on those individuals, but it has major ramifications for those individuals. So knowing that information was really important for us because that allowed us to help those folks meet their compliance needs. So it wasn't so much that we were telling the SNAP agency that an individual had this status or was doing, this as it related to their status, but it was more, we knew this about this individual. We could help them meet the requirements to comply, to keep their benefits. So again, it seems like a lot of information, and it might be a lot of information that you're adding to track if you're not already doing this work to just understand who you're serving and to be able to track their participation. But if you are already, then it could be as simple as adding a few fields to your database. And that's not always super simple, but it's relatively often an easy lift. And then also, consider the fiscal data and the fields, the things you might need to track kind of in relation to the services that you're funding. There might be some things that you have to do there as well.
Great. Thanks, Susan. Much appreciated. Very helpful. So I think you're also getting the sense that, from state to state, from county to county, in some cases, things work differently with the SNAP agency. So as far as reporting information back to your SNAP agency, there will be a mechanism you'll have. In some cases, it may be spreadsheets, something somewhat informal, maybe more sort of labor intensive. And in some cases, it will be through a shared case management system, something that's maybe a little more accessible remotely and virtually. Or in some cases, it could be a combination of the two. So, again, that's something you will find out and need to, respond to and adjust to as a SNAP ENT provider. But there will be something, and you'll learn what it is, and you should get some good sort of assistance and training in making sure that you understand how to do all of that. So I'm now going to turn things over to my colleague, Bob Thibodeau. But before I do, I just wanted, and I sort of meant to do this before, so I want to just, again, put another plug in for our technical assistance cohorts, because I think of all the topics that we cover in our webinars, the one that we can focus on in more detail and answer more of these specific questions on through our cohorts are these questions around capacity. I think this is a topic that that really aligns well with the technical assistance cohorts, because in the cohorts, you'll have technical assistance available to you on a monthly basis and some more targeted webinars and training. So again, just want to remind you of that and put a plug in for the technical assistance cohorts if that's something you're interested in considering. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bob Thibodeau. He'll start with serving ENT participants.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I want to echo what you just said too, because keep in mind that we've been practicing at this for a year now, so we've got it down to a science. So if you're coming in on the technical assistance that we're going to be providing this next year, you're in for a good treat. So just want to ring out that. So yeah, so talking about capacity as far as serving ENT participants, it's important to understand kind of the differences and the things that you need to think about when you're looking at your participants. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Nick. So we know that as an ESC, you're already serving folks that are potentially eligible for SNAP ENT. So these are folks with little or no income, and then most likely eligible to receive SNAP benefits, which makes them eligible for SNAP ENT. So again, it's really about understanding, who those folks are and understanding who's going to be eligible for SNAP ENT. And then, of course, it really becomes helpful, because of the fact that they have to be on SNAP benefits, is having a basic understanding of SNAP eligibility rules and the certification periods that go along with that, to make sure that, it's one thing to get them on SNAP ENT. It's another thing to make sure they maintain that eligibility so they can complete the services that you're providing. And then, it's about, establishing that system to make sure that you're tracking those referrals. And really what that means is that on a monthly basis, you're going to have to, confirm that they continue to receive SNAP benefits, because, SNAP benefits are issued on a monthly basis. Folks could lose eligibility for, depending on what their conditions are. Their household could change, their income could change. Things could be different that could kind of bump them off their SNAP benefits. So it's good to keep track of that and make sure that you're checking on that on a monthly basis. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So like it says here, you're responsible to making sure that folks, remain keep that SNAP status so that they continue to be eligible for SNAP ENT. Again, that's to your benefit, to make sure that you're getting the most out of the SNAP ENT program as far as getting reimbursements for serving folks that are eligible for that program. So some of the things you want to make sure that you're tracking is, again, making sure you're tracking that current SNAP status, and that's something you do right at the beginning when you do that initial assessment with the individual, is confirming that. And then, of course, like I said, ongoing on a monthly basis, making sure they maintain that SNAP eligibility. And then to know when they actually started receiving SNAP benefits, and that makes, gives you a start date as far as when they are eligible to be enrolled in SNAP ENT. So it's important to know that during the intake when you first do that initial assessment. And then, like I said before, if you have access to and can get that information about when they recertify, and for most folks in most states and SNAP agencies, folks are put on a 12-month recertification period. They will have if they are on a 12-month recertification, they're going to have a mid-certification and review that they have to complete. So that's at the 6-month point. So if you can, like I said, get access to that information and kind of track that for the folks that you serve that are on SNAP ET, it's really helpful to them to make sure they maintain their SNAP benefits so they continue to receive that food assistance. That's very important. But also, again, for you to take the most advantage of making sure that you're claiming the services that you're giving to these folks that are eligible and get your reimbursements through the 50/50 program. And then, as mentioned before, the ABOD status. There's right now most states are under waivers, but as those go away, ABODs are going to have time limits, and usually that's a 3-month time limit if they're not participating in a program. SNAP ET, fortunately, is one of those programs where the ABOD can have that count towards their participation, their work participation, so that they can continue to receive benefits while they're getting services from you. So it's important to make sure that you track that and have an understanding of who's an ABOD and who's not. So again, there's different mechanisms, just like the services reporting and everything. There's different mechanisms for how the state is going to have you kind of share that information and verify information about people's eligibility for SNAP ET. I can tell you that for the most part, they're going to be working with you to try to come up with an efficient process as possible, depending on what their capabilities are and what your capabilities are as far as doing that verification process. Some of it is going to be automated, where you have a shared case management system that you can look into and verify somebody's eligibility and receipt of SNAP benefits. But in other cases, you may have to submit a spreadsheet via email and then get an answer back from the SNAP agency on whether or not those individuals that you have listed on that spreadsheet are eligible for SNAP ET and to become enrolled. So, but both methods can be efficient. There's things that you can do to make sure that this becomes kind of a process you do on either a daily or weekly basis. And it's always good to have something written down on how you're going to do this process, so that all your staff are aware of how it's done and how to get it done right. Next slide. So this is just kind of show an example of what a roster would look like, an eligibility verification roster. Just some vital information on here as far as whether or not you've confirmed their SNAP eligibility. The date that they are certified for SNAP is always good to track, and how long their certification period is for, and then whether or not they're an ABOD. So just some example things. It's not saying that all the rosters that are going to be used in all states or all SNAP agencies are going to be the same, but it's just kind of a quick example of what they might look like. Next slide. So let's talk about funding and how the capacity deals with the funding that you use in your organization, and how again, things need to be looked at a little bit differently for SNAP ET and in building that capacity. So what this means is, again, we know that employment social enterprises have the type of revenue that is needed to support a SNAP ET program. You have non-federal funding sources that you can use to, again, pay for the expenses and services that you're providing to these participants. So, and what does it mean? It means having a system so that you can allocate those expenses. We know that it's very unlikely that all the participants you're serving under a certain program or program that you have they're all going to be SNAP ET participants. They won't be. So you have to have a way to to allocate those expenses for those program services to the E&T participants. And it's about also tracking the receipts to make sure that, you know, any expenses that you're going to be claiming, that you can back those up with receipts, and especially the support services that you're providing the SNAP E&T participants. You want to make sure you're keeping receipts for those and have a way to maintain those. When you're submitting your monthly invoices, you're submitting for actual expenses. Even though you've put certain expenses on a budget that you've submitted to the SNAP agency, it's not about, you know, dividing up that budget into equal parts that you're going to bill monthly. It's about looking at what your actual expenses are for the eligible SNAP E&T participants that you serve, and then making sure that you have that information available on your site in case you have to have an audit, or they need to track or have questions about some of the expenses that you're claiming on your invoice. You need to make sure you have that. You probably won't be submitting, you know, all the backup documentation and all the receipts and everything when you submit a monthly invoice. But again, you want to make sure you have that information on site so that if you are audited or have somebody question a certain expense, then you have the means to back it up. And this gives you kind of an example of what an invoice might look like and what goes into those invoices. Again, it's we want you to get the most out of the 50% reimbursement. So it's looking at, you know, what allowable expenses you have that have been approved in your budget, and translating those into the invoice of the actual expenses that you had in that month. So again, it's taking that expense data that you had during the billing period. It's making sure you have proof of those expenses to back it up. And then what your allocation method is. Again, because all your participants are not going to be SNAP E&T participants, you want to have that allocation method to, you know, allocate the time that your staff put into a certain program, the program expenses that you had, and making sure that you're claiming those expenses for serving those participants. And again, the backup documentation showing that you did verify eligibility for the people that you're billing for, that you served during that billing period. And then once that's submitted again to the SNAP agency, they review it, they make sure everything looks good, and then once they approve it, then you can be reimbursed up to 50% of those allowable expenses. So again, another closer look at the sample invoice and what this should look like. Again, this is going to be, as far as the line items that are on this invoice, they should match up with what you have on your approved budget that you submitted at the beginning of the program year and that the SNAP agency approved. You may not have expenses in every line item every month, but it's good to list those on the invoice to make sure you don't miss anything. And then again, I would, you know, want to emphasize on here that that indirect rate. And we talked about this during the funding webinar that we had a week or so ago, and you know, make sure that you claim that indirect rate. That's very important. Next slide. So we talked about auditing. We like to call it program monitoring, your contract monitoring. There's really two parts to this that you need to be aware of. One is the program, and the other is the fiscal. In the program piece of the monitoring, they're going to be looking at you know, your individual participation and you know, how you manage the case for those individuals, making sure that that matches up with what you reported as far as folks that are enrolled in your program. Making sure those participants have the right materials in their case files, making sure they've signed release forms, they've been notified of their civil rights, things like that need to be in their case files. And then if they've received any support services, that you have it logged properly and that you have the receipts and everything in their case files to make sure that you have those records to back up those expenses. And then again,
oh, did we lose? We lost you for a second, Bob, but I think you're back.
Is he back?
I am back. Can you hear
Oh, you're
me?
back. Okay.
Yes.
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 I don't know what happened.
It
Somebody-
might be helpful if you turn off camera. I know sometimes that causes me to pause.
I'm way out in the country here, so sometimes our internet isn't so good. So yeah, I'll do that. I'll turn off my camera.
You're fine now, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So the last thing I was going to say on the program is making sure that you verify the individual, is receiving SNAP benefits, and you have a record of that you've verified that on a monthly basis. And then on the fiscal side, again, making sure that you can track where those expenses are coming from as far as non-federal funds, and then proof that those expenses are reasonable and necessary for the individuals that you serve. And then again, the receipts to back up those expenses, and then the invoice that you've submitted, that everything lines up and can be traced back to that revenue that you're claiming to use for those services. And then of course a record of your what method you're using to allocate your expenses. How you divide it up. The folks you serve as far as ENT participants versus your total population, and that percentage, and how you're allocating those expenses towards your ENT participants. So just one more thing I wanted to say about this, Nick, before you move on. Like it says here, it's not a list of all the compliance points, but really what you want to take away from this is that all of your staff will have a role in this, a role in how you comply with these monitoring visits. So it's good to get all of them involved, but I'm going to talk about more about that in just a minute anyway. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, another part about the capacity is making sure your staff are trained properly, and that you have the internal processes to make sure that you're getting the most out of the SNAP ENT program as far as getting your reimbursements and building the capacity of your program. Next slide. So it's always good to, as far as these tasks that go along with SNAP ENT, is making sure that you distribute those tasks across the different staff members that are appropriate to do those tasks, and make sure that they're coordinating with each other, so that kind of works a lot smoother and better for making sure you get the most out of it. Make sure that the tasks that you assign folks are the best fit as far as the role they're currently serving. Again, like Nick said before, you don't want to go out and hire new staff just to do this work. You want to look at what your staff are currently doing and see what is the best fit as far as these tasks are concerned, and get those folks to take on these tasks. And then just integrate it into the daily routine. Things they're already doing, just add this to that, and it becomes kind of just a regular routine for them, and making sure they have the proper training to do that. And again, it's always good to write these things down, so that if folks are absent or out for a while on vacation or whatever, that somebody can pick that up and continue that like they never left, so that these services continue to happen, and you can continue to keep tracking what you need for SNAP ENT. Next slide. So another aspect about this, about building your capacity, is to make sure that you have a good relationship and good connection with the SNAP agency. So in order to do that, it's hopefully within the area you're going to be partnering with the SNAP agency, is they have a SNAP ENT partner handbook, which has a lot of good information in it about how you can run your program and run it like I said, to get the most out of it. So it's looking at that, not waiting until you're actually started your services under SNAP ENT, but doing it right at the beginning, looking through the handbook, making sure that if you have any questions about what's in that handbook, that you get those questions answered right up front, and understanding what the reporting requirements are, and what your expectations are as far as being a provider under SNAP ENT. It's always good to make sure you establish a good point of contact at the SNAP agency so you can get your questions answered and get those questions answered quickly too. And make sure that again, a good way to do that is to meet with your SNAP agency on a regular basis, and different ways you can do that. Most SNAP agencies will have regular meetings with their providers, so make sure you attend those meetings. You may not have, issues going on at the time, but it's good to, keep informed and again, keep that connection. Invite them to your agency for a visit, on a regular basis. Again, to keep that communication channel open. Also invite yourself, ask if you can attend some of their staff meetings to talk about your programs, to inform their staff about, what's going on at your agency. It's always good, again, to keep that connection and, making sure that, again, your process works efficiently. Next slide. So again, looking internally within your own staff, and especially your management, we always know that it's good to have the support and backing of your managers and leaders in your organization. So it's always good to make sure that they understand what your SNAP ENT is about, what the program is about, and how this can benefit your agency, how it impacts your goals and your mission for your agency, and how SNAP ENT can help you grow your program, and how it impact your day-to-day operations, and again how you can really increase access for the people that you serve. And again, the managers really have to be part of the kind of the day-to-day monitoring of the program, making sure that it's working properly, making sure you report to them, how it's doing, not only on a monthly basis, but really on a day-to-day basis, and integrate that into what your staff meetings that you're doing, things any internal reports that you're doing for your managers, making sure that SNAP ENT is a part of that, so they can make sure they stay in the loop. Next slide. And then for your frontline staff, some best practices that we see as far as, we talked about training before, making sure that they have the training materials that they need to do the job. They need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. Look at the way you're currently training your staff and see how you can integrate SNAP ENT into those training methods. We usually like to follow guidelines for adult learning, which means that you provide sessions that are information that's in short sessions, repeat what's necessary and do follow-ups, and then provide access to the training materials after the fact to make sure they have something to they can reference later and kind of look to later to kind of brush up on some of the procedures. Your state agency or SNAP agency may ask that certain trainings, that they provide, that your staff would attend those trainings as well. So it's good to make sure you check with them and find out what those are about and what trainings they'll need to attend as far as being a SNAP ENT provider. And again, making sure that you have, create good process for your staff to make sure they're doing their SNAP ENT activities properly. Again, document their roles and responsibilities. Have those written down so that they not only they can do them, but in case they're absent, somebody else can pick that up and do those things. Make sure that you have a way to outline those processes step by step. How they can support participant enrollment in SNAP, help folks apply for SNAP benefits, reporting on the SNAP ENT services that you're providing, and then of course, what role they play as far as invoicing and financial compliance, making sure that you're getting credit for all the services you're providing to those SNAP ENT participants. Next slide. So coming back to the capacity and how you're thinking about capacity, this kind of looking a little bit differently than what Nick talked about before. Again, looking at that first year, it's really about understanding what your expectations are as far as an E&T partner. Again, that handbook I mentioned before has a lot of good information about that. And making sure that your staff are properly trained and that they have the knowledge they need to do the jobs that you're expecting them to do as far as the different tasks that are related to SNAP E&T. And then again, once you get into that second year and you start seeing the reimbursements coming in, is thinking about how that's helping you to build your capacity. Those funds that you've invested in these services for the SNAP E&T folks, you're getting that 50% back that you can reinvest into the program and make things go further, serve more people, and provide better services. Then as you're getting into year 3 and 5 and then ongoing, is looking at if things are going well, is looking how you can add different programs to the services you provide to SNAP E&T. What things could you additional things you could be doing to support them. And then if you have quite a few more participants that you're serving, then you may want to think about adding some additional admin support so that you can support those folks and make sure things keep going smoothly. Look at any labor market changes that are going on in your community. What things might be helpful as far as looking at different careers that you could be supporting folks with and referring them to make sure that they're getting the best employment outcomes. Then we always encourage providers to look to partnerships within their community, things that could enhance not only the programs they provide, but also the service they provide to participants. Things like, partnering with community colleges. They may have some programs that are just the right fit for people that you're serving. So it's good to have partnerships that way. Could it even be a chance for some co-enrollments with folks? So just some things to think about as far as your capacity, when you first start out, and then as your program grows, additional things you could do to add and build your capacity for serving SNAP E&T participants. Next slide. So now it's time to get into some, kind of practical experience here, what's going on with building capacity and, hearing from our folks from Project Return. So I'm going to turn it over to Elijah and Emma from Project Return in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm not sure who's going first, but they're going to switch over to their slides.
Are y'all able to see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't know if it's not in presentation view, but we can definitely see the slides.
Perfect. Is it in presentation view for y'all now?
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Emma Kaler. I am the Quality Assurance Manager at Project Return here in Nashville. You're also going to hear from my colleague, Elijah Jenkins. He does our data entry at Project Return. We're a nonprofit that has an employment social enterprise component. We also do some housing and wraparound supports for people who are leaving incarceration and returning to their communities. We want to set them up for success and kind of reduce recidivism rates in our state. So that's a little bit about our nonprofit. We started with SNAP E&T in 2019. We are partnered with United Way, and we just started initially figuring out how our services already align with SNAP E&T components. And United Way really helped us figure that out, figure out our scope of work, and get our work plan completed so that we could submit that. And then we were able to get onto the SNAP E&T kind of year-long contract in October of that year. So we did have a contract from that July to September. Our first invoice was mainly administrative items, getting kind of workman comps insurance set up, some of the portions of staff salary for the services that we're providing. But then in August, we were able to start invoicing for participant services. We had 17 within those first few months. This is a little picture of what our staffing looked like initially. In 2019, if you'll see that first dot, our program service manager was really the first person a part of it. They were working with United Way to get all of the scope of work completed. And then as we started to implement it, we added a few people. So the program service coordinator was doing a lot of the case management that you heard Bob and Nick talk about, logging into those kind of mutual forces for the state and for us to show what services our participants were getting, if they were still active when they were enrolled. And then our associate director was doing allocation on our side of what services go to SNAP ENT for reimbursement, and then submitting that to our finance director, who would do the invoicing piece. And then our grants manager would do all of our reporting, data collection, making sure it's entered correctly. And our services staff, they're the ones who are actually providing the services that are reimbursable. So they're logging into, we use Salesforce, which is kind of our electronic database that everybody can add if they receive this service, what date, what's their SNAP ENT enrollment exit date. Elijah will talk more about that. So that was kind of 2019. We did what Nick and Bob both kind of discussed. We didn't hire new people. We kind of found who was already doing these things in other ways, and we added SNAP into those pieces. And this year it looks pretty similar, kind of changed some roles around. We have some operations and program expansion efforts. We have a Chattanooga location, so we are currently actually working with the TA assistants with Emily. I think I saw her on the call for our playbook and kind of moving to Chattanooga and how to get it started in a new office. But we still do all of the data, invoicing, allocation. We just kind of switched who is doing that currently. And I think, Elijah, if you want to hop on and talk a little bit about kind of that case management piece that we do.
Hey there, everybody. My name's Elijah. I'm the data entry coordinator here at the Project Return National Office. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
A little louder would be great.
Yeah, a little louder,
if
just,
possible.
Okay. Sorry about that. This microphone on this laptop is a little bit, it's not as sensitive as it could be. But yeah, I'll go ahead and kind of launch into some of these data points we've attached here. So you can see in 2019, we began our SNAP ENT partnership in August of that year. Kind of like what Nick was saying, initially, like you're just kind of settling into things and you're not going to have, a massive amount of referrals, but, around that part of that year after we had started, we had about 30% enrolled out of our total population. And then the next year after that, you can see a significant increase at that point. We were at about 45% of our participants being enrolled in there. And then 2021, another complete year of working with SNAP ENT, we jumped to about 47%. And I would say it's a pretty good number to look at too, because I think the aim is to have about 50% enrollment. And, obviously a lot of the challenges you run into in 2020 with working in offices and, the proximity and things like that, you're still able to kind of grow your program by looking a little bit more into how you're providing those services and being innovative and creative about how you're providing services to people to make sure you're still engaging them with SNAP ENT. So you can see that even in just, a little over 2 years, we were still able to grow that engagement from nearly 30% up to about 50%, being about 1/3 of our people to more like half of our people. Can you hit the next slide, please? Your next slide, please. Awesome. So as your program goes, you're going to have more engagement, and there is going to be a greater need for data management at that point. Especially looking at, having nearly 1/3 of your population to more like 50% of your population being enrolled in SNAP ENT at some point. there is going to be a more of a, I guess, time-intensive kind of work that has to do with case management and fulfilling those follow-ups and that reporting and the data collection. Like Emma was saying, we do utilize Salesforce, which is a database that anybody here in the organization can use. Much like Nick was saying as well, you do have roles that are a little bit more facing SnapENT, but everyone here still kind of fulfills some kind of function in making sure that that SnapENT process keeps going smoothly. So for example, our services team utilizes Salesforce to log any services that are delivered. We keep track of whoever is a SnapENT participant, their enrollment dates, their exit dates for SnapENT in the force. That's also how we run reports to do our allocations once we get to that point. That's like the invoicing and the financials part of that. I think it's really important to have a unified database where you can keep all that necessary data collection and any participant updates, being able to track participant activities, things like that, because it is all information that's very important to have as you engage more and more people in SnapENT. We also do utilize spreadsheets, and we have like a shared server here, so that any kind of documentation that could be employment verification, certifications, SnapENT enrollment forms, things like participant civil rights forms, things like that, that you're going to need to have to fulfill your compliance over time. I'm trying to think of what else we got going on here. So Salesforce, once again, that's our method of collecting that kind of necessary information. That's able to house any documents you're going to need as far as like, as people are moving towards employment and things like that, and they're verifying employment, you're going to need those forms to be able to move those towards, fulfilling things in your state database as well. And being sure to keep up with your track of like your updates about participant activities and things like that, and how those can fit into your SnapENT components. Being able to just kind of pull that up on that database and have quick access to that at any time as you're fulfilling follow-ups, doing case management, moving people into components or enrolling them in new components like job retention. You're able to have all of that stuff on, at a quick, fingertips access, and you're always staying updated with it. It's always up to date. It's always being, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that it's always it's kind of, as you move your timeline of people getting enrolled, you're going to have an up-to-date process in place for keeping their data, their activities, their forms all in one place, and anybody can access that as needed.
Thank you, Elijah. I'm going to talk a little bit about the quality assurance part. Most of that is internal for Project Return. So anytime we do a service that is a SnapENT component and it's eligible for reimbursement, it might come through a check request. It might come through something we ordered on Amazon, so somebody could be outfitted for work. I go through all of those items to make sure they're logged in Salesforce correctly with the price. And then I will allocate that funding to SnapENT if it falls within their SNAP enrollment and exit date. So I go through and check all of that as they come in, as well as at the end of every month, look through all of the eligible services and allocate which is going to funding for SnapENT participants versus which is going to funding for other areas for our organization. So a lot of what I am looking at is if it's entered correctly to make sure we're not missing any services, and then to get that information to our CFO to do the invoicing piece, so that, as Bob said, our kind of invoice is specific to what we actually did that month, not that kind of overall budget that we have. So we have a list on the right that we just thought was helpful for us to know what specific things were related to which SnapENT component, and anybody can kind of look in and see that. And so those last two pieces are where Elijah and I fall for the most part. And then lastly, it'll change at some point. What we have been working on recently with the assistance of the TA cohort is our playbook. So we are expanding into Chattanooga. It's a smaller office. We're having to figure out, okay, based on the amount of non-federal funding we have in Chattanooga, what services can we provide there? And we thought it would be helpful for our whole staff to really have a step-by-step guide on how Project Return does SNAP ENT. So I kind of just put our table of contents on here so you could see some of the stuff that we've included. It is helpful for training us as we do different pieces of it, as well as new staff who will come in and help. And then in Chattanooga, when they get it kind of started from the beginning in their office. But we just touch on everything from meeting with the, United Way to filling out a work plan, figuring out staff allocations, what services are reimbursable, how do we make sure financially we're on top of all of that. So I do think it's really helpful, as they were kind of mentioning, to have a playbook just for your company to see how specifically you do it, because it does change by state, and that's something that you want to keep up on. And then we do have important resources at the end, which is links to our state handbook and the other links that we've gotten through these webinars. Our staff does do the webinars if they're coming into the office and are going to be working with SNAP ENT. So we like to have that all combined in one place to do easy training for new employees. And that's kind of our little, how we do SNAP ENT in a nutshell.
That was great. Thank you very much for sharing what you're doing. Very helpful and certainly much appreciated. So I'm going to, without making everybody dizzy, is open things up now for questions. So we have a little bit of time. I think we're just past the top of the hour, but if people have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask them. You can put them in the chat. I'm not sure if we have any questions in the chat or not. We have one question about, are you willing to share your playbook?
I'm not sure if I have the executive decision on that. I would love to, so I will advocate for this. But once we get it finalized, if you want to put your email or something in the chat, I can write it down and we can send it over.
That'd be great.
And in case it's helpful, we're working on a resource that can kind of give a template of what a playbook might look like. So not as specific as Project Returns is for their organization, obviously, but we're working on kind of a template guide to help providers that might be thinking about creating something for their organization. So once we have that, it'll be on RedUp Workshop as well.
Other questions from the group? Lots of people interested in your playbook. It's like, for good reason. So we have a question about the percentage of your total income you anticipate from this. So I'm taking that as, of your total income, what's the percentage that comes from SNAP ENT? How does that pencil out for you?
I'll be really honest, I don't have that number. That's a COO understanding, but right. I don't know what the normal kind of common percentage is.
Right. Well, I think one of the things you shared is that nearly half of your participants are ENT eligible, right? And so that means the services you're delivering to that 47%, that all of that is eligible for reimbursement. So a good percentage of the non-federal funding you're using is going to be available for reimbursement. This is my non-COO way of answering that question, or helping you out on that question.
And I just answered the question in the chat about what's offered for the next cohort. And yes, so that'll be kind of the focus of our next training or webinar session, is about next steps in the technical assistance cohort. And you will have TA as a part of that as well, like Emma and Elijah have kind of outlined in their presentation. All of this information, we just hope we encourage you to join our next session, because we won't have enough time in this session to answer all cohort questions. But in terms of what's needed for an application, what we're looking for, when you'll be notified, will all be outlined in 2 weeks on May 11th for details. So we want to highlight that. Please join for that, where we can answer and do a deep dive into the questions that are being posed here. I don't want to take away from, any of today's topic, but I just want to highlight that for folks who have questions about the cohort.
Any other questions about what we've talked about today? If not, Ken, I'll turn it over to you to kind of wrap things up. But I just want to say on behalf of SGI, I appreciate everybody being on today. And I really appreciate Emma and Elijah for sharing what you're doing. I think among all the great things you shared is you shared your starting point, where you had a small number of participants, and over time how that built and how you built that up and how that grew. And you did a lot of that during the pandemic, and that's very, very impressive. So if nothing else, that should give inspiration and hope to those of you who are wondering if this is going to work for you. You start here and you grow, and it's an opportunity to really strengthen your program. So thank you very much for what you shared. Kaylin, I'll